Welcome to the Patrick Coffin Show, back with fresh podcast guests, overcoming some tech issues, and so happy to be joined by Dr. Steve Mosher. But before I introduce Dr. Mosher and his fine book, which is called The Devil in Communist China, I want to thank Mike Lindell for his support of this broadcast, and mention if you go to mypillow.com and just put my name, Patrick, in as a coupon code, you get up to 66% off. Everything I own when it has to do with comfort and good sleep and feeling relaxed in my own abode, I get from mypillow.com. It's pillows in multiple sizes. I never fly anywhere without my travel MyPillow. I have slippers. In fact, I'm wearing them right now. Didn't pre-rehearse this. Super comfortable. Egyptian sheets, bathrobes. Go to mypillow.com. Patrick, my name, gets you a big fat Patrick Coffin Show discount. So this show is dedicated to seeking the truth and understanding the story of our lives and the story that the media tells us about what's happening in the world. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent, true, false. That's our main lens, is good, evil, right, and wrong. Our Lady of Fatima said in 1917 to the three shepherd children that Russia would spread her errors around the world. And there's so many errors attached to that prophetic announcement by Our Lady, the Mother of God. Certainly it was a reference to communism, and nowhere in the world where communism was spread has it been more entrenched and more dangerous and more ambitious to take over the world than it has in China through the CCP. Dr. Steve Mosher has been a guest on the show many times before. He is an expert on China and America history. He was the first social scientist permitted into China back in 1979 at the request of the Chinese government. He went in there as a pro-choice atheist, and he came out eventually as a pro-life Catholic, now father of 9. This is the latest in a kind of a trilogy, The Devil and Karl Marx, The Devil and I think it was Belladad. This one is called The Devil in Communist China, from Mao down to Xi. Steve Mosher, welcome to the show.
It's good to be with you again, Patrick.
What was the second Devil and? Was it The Devil and Belladad, or the Devil and, what was the second in the series?
It was The Devil and Belladad, the great Catholic convert, of course, who spent decades in the communist movement in the United States, and then was converted in part through the efforts of the great Archbishop Fulton Sheen. And
Yes.
of course, came over from dark to light, and we were glad to have her in our ranks.
You can hear Belladad's speeches on various social media platforms. It's really instructive to listen to her, going from full-on communist apparatchik and influencer through the New York education system, and all the things that Senator McCarthy has said seems to have been vindicated over and over again.
Yeah, it really does. Of course, the left has gone out of their way to isolate and destroy the reputation of Senator Eugene McCarthy, but he was probably more right than wrong, and the very anger and bitterness that they spewed towards him was, I think, evidence that he was on to something. The communist movement in the United States has been in place for over 100 years. And it has done and is doing even today. The Marxist-Leninists have done tremendous damage at our universities, to our culture, to our major media. And, that's why I wrote The Devil in Communist China, of course, as a cautionary tale of what happens when you build a civilization not on life and love, which we Catholics have been trying to build for the last 2,000 years, not very successfully, I might add, but we've tried to build a civilization based on love of God and love of neighbor. And you see the polar opposite in the Soviet Union, now defunct, but living and breathing and alive today in China, a civilization based on hatred of God and literally hatred of humanity. And so in writing in detail about that hatred, that organization, that organized criminal conspiracy called the Chinese Communist Party, I wanted to give people a glimpse not only of what was happening in China, but also what might happen here if this beast, this evil cult of Marxism-Leninism spreads here.
Let's talk about Chairman Mao. I got to interview Patrick Buchanan twice, and one of those conversations, I asked him about a famous picture of Nixon toasting Mao Zedong in the early 70s in China. And I asked Mr. Buchanan what it was like because he's in the photo standing next to him. And
Yeah.
I asked him, what was it like to stand next to your boss who was toasting the most prolific mass murderer in history? And he kind of chuckled in his self-deprecating way. And he said it was extra weird, Patrick, because I was the one who had to write that toast. And,
yeah, that would have been. No.
Well, I'm asking about Chairman Mao because most people under 30 have no idea who Mao Zedong is. So what's the Cliff's Notes summary of the man who really took the devilish ideology of communism seriously and executed it, quote unquote, better than anyone else in history? Who was Mao?
Well, Mao was one of the founders of the Chinese Communist Party back in the early 1920s. He was the one who set up the first red base in Jiangxi province in 1930, and from there he went on to become the longtime chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. He was the head of the party for longer than Lenin and Stalin and Hitler were in charge of their respective totalitarian regimes. So he had a huge influence on China. Did not die until 1976, and throughout the 1950s, beginning really with the Chinese Civil War in the 30s and 40s, and throughout the 1950s with purges and persecutions and executions, and continuing on to the Great Leap Forward in the late 1950s and the Cultural Revolution, which everyone knows in the 1960s. He kept China in a constant state of turmoil, always identifying one group after another to be hated and destroyed by the Chinese Communist Party, which feeds, by the way, on such hatred, and always must have a target outside the party in society at large to target and destroy.
So this is Pol Pot in Cambodia, Stalin in Russia, Hitler in Germany. Think of all the tin pot dictators who've killed massive amounts of their own population. All of them combined don't quite compare with Mao's figures.
No, don't even come close. Don't even come close. So this is the biggest disaster I think that the Chinese people have ever experienced. They've had bad emperors before. They've had civil wars. They've had civil unrest. They've had famines. But in terms of the total number of his fellow citizens that he killed, it's just you add a zero to or two zeros to the number killed by any other dictator in history, including the ones we read the most about, Hitler and Stalin and so forth. And Mao absolutely had no compunctions about killing his fellow Chinese. When 45 million people were dying in the famine that he caused by the Great Leap Forward, forcing everybody to give up family farms and forcing them into huge communes where the men lived in one dormitory, the women lived in others, and the children were cared for in state-run nurseries so they could be propagandized, brainwashed by the state from an early age. That collectivization effort failed, and 45 million people died in the biggest man-made famine in human history. Actually, I call it Mao-made because it was made by Chairman Mao's mistakes.
I want to get to Xi Jinping and the Vatican so-called agreements and the relationship between the modern church and China, but I want to get there through asking you about the parallels between communism as a almost as a religious ism and Catholicism. Why is communism a kind of rival or substitute version for the faith founded by Christ? What aspirations do they, on the surface, seem to have in common that makes people fall for it? Does that make sense?
Well, communism promises to create heaven on earth. I mean, communism, in a sense, is a variation on the ancient temptation of the devil to Adam and Eve in the garden, right? The temptation was, if you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall be as gods. The temptation of communism is that if you follow this fantasy of communism, we will create heaven on earth itself. You won't have to believe in the hereafter. You can believe in the here and now because we'll solve all your problems. And that's a fantasy. It actually is a fantasy that the Communist Party admits is not true. In a secret document, get this, Patrick, in a secret document back in 2013, Directive number 9 of the Central Committee of 2013, it says that an accurate account of the ideology and the history of the Chinese Communist Party will be a mortal peril, a deadly threat to the continued rule of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, why would an accurate account of the ideology of the Chinese Communist Party be a mortal threat to its continued rule? Because it's an illusion. It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy used to deceive the people, a kind of new opiate of the people, right? To borrow Marx's phrase, that's going to deceive them into following power-hungry, lustful leaders who will not create heaven on earth, but will deceive them into thinking that one day the government is going to fade away. One day, everyone will be equal. One day, everyone will produce as much as they possibly can and give it to everyone according to their needs. It's all just an illusion intended to deceive the masses into following power-hungry dictators who sit at the top of this power pyramid with no intention of ever giving up their hold on power. So they create a myth, a pseudo-religion of communism that has its own revelation, right? That at the end of the day, we're going to have a perfect world. And they create in China, the Chinese Communist Party has created what I call the Church of China. It wants all Chinese to be pew-sitters in the Church of China, to be so patriotic, so loyal to the Chinese Communist Party that it treats the party and its leader especially almost as a god. And the acolytes in the Church of China are members of the Chinese Communist Party, 94 million members, by the way, the largest political organization on the planet. And then the Pope, so-called, quote unquote, in the Chinese Communist Party hierarchy would be the leader, the current leader, Xi Jinping himself. And this religion, quasi-religion, communism, is intolerant. Not just intolerant, that's putting it too mildly. Absolutely has a hatred towards any other religion, the true religions. Why? Because it is godless at its core. Just as Mao was godless. He admitted back in 1936 in the interview with the American leftist Edgar Snow, who published a famous book, Red Star Over China, he admitted that he was lawless and godless. But I say he got that in the wrong order, because you're godless first, and without God, of course, you respect no human law. So you're God. He was godless and lawless, and so is the political party, the criminal conspiracy, the largest terrorist organization on the planet, the Chinese Communist Party. It is essentially lawless and godless.
You talk about a concept of legalism, not just small L legalism like being a Pharisee. What is legalism as a kind of soil from which modern communism, I won't say flourished, spread under Xi Jinping? What is legalism?
Well, 2,500 years ago in China, a long time ago, there was a war of all against all. We had in Europe the 100 Years' War. China had, during the Warring States period, 500 Years' War. The war went on and on. It started between small feudal states. There were 700 small feudal states, and they fought against each other until there were only a handful left. And then one state, the Qing state, from which we get the word China, became dominant and unified all of North China. The Qing state became dominant by practicing what was called legalism. And if you look at legalism, they had the legalist scholars, political advisors said you have to have a standing army. You have to control agricultural production, especially production of salt, and you have to control the production of iron because that produces weapons. You have to have song and dance troops going around the country singing the praises of the king, now emperor. You have to burn the books of competing philosophies. So the only books that are allowed to exist are the legalist writings. You have to have concentration camps. They use the concentration camp prisoners to build the Great Wall and the Great Canals of China. All of the things, you have to have political commissars in the military to make sure that the generals don't become too ambitious. So all of the things that we associate with modern Marxist Leninism were actually invented in China 2,500 years ago. And the emperors, the later emperors, admitted that in the Han Dynasty and the Sui Dynasty, the Tang Dynasty, the Ming and the Qing. They would say that we are Confucian on the outside, but legalist on the inside. What does that mean? Well, Confucianism says you should obey the emperor because he's the father to the people. And you're the people, you're his children, and you owe him obedience, just like younger brothers owe obedience to older brothers, and wives owe obedience to husbands, and so on and so forth. It's a recipe for trying to persuade people to obey the existing social order and respect the power of the emperor. That was the silken costume that the Chinese emperors wore. But underneath that was the iron scaffolding of legalism, where if you didn't obey, you would go to a concentration camp. You would be executed along with your entire family out to 5 generations. You would be forced to go into exile, internal exile. So the reality of Chinese rule was pretty brutal. And Mao in 1921 could have gone the other way. He could have followed Sun Yat-sen and later Chiang Kai-shek in modeling his government on the United States, because that's what Sun Yat-sen, the founder of nationalist China, did. He borrowed everything from the United States, the rule of law, many principles of the Constitution. But Chairman Mao went the other way. He went back to Chinese history 2,500 years ago, to legalism, and he found a modern day equivalent in communism. And so it was a natural fit for him. Mm-hmm. And he used it to, compel the people, convince the people to follow him. He had a personality cult rivaling that of the first emperor of the Qin dynasty and rivaling that of Stalin and Lenin. His picture was in every house. When I arrived in China in 1979 as the first American social scientist allowed in China, every house had a picture of Mao up on the wall of the central room of the house above the altar. The altar, what was the altar? The altar was where the ancestral tablets were, where the people remembered their ancestors in prayer. But above that, because he was supposed to be exalted above all things, was a picture of Chairman Mao.
Iconography means so much in communicating and emphasizing the propaganda.
Yeah.
Was Xi Jinping groomed because of his resemblance to Mao, that he would be a kind of worthy, not successor, because there were other leaders between the death of Mao and the rise of Xi Jinping in 2012? Or has he taken it as a personal mission to resurrect, so to speak, the more hardcore version of CCP communism exemplified by Mao?
Well, Xi's father was a senior leader in the Chinese Communist Party and was purged and persecuted during the Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s and early 70s. And Xi Jinping himself was sent down to the villages along with millions of young people in China were deceived into becoming Chairman Mao's Red Guards. And they attacked their teachers, and they attacked the political leaders, the ones that Mao wanted them to attack. They were Mao's attack dogs. They destroyed the existing society in order to cement Chairman Mao's hold on power. And once he had cemented his hold on power and killed his chief rival, the head of government, Liu Shaoqi, and killed his chief military rival, who was a general called Peng Dehui. Once he'd gotten everybody else out of the way, what he did was he sent all the Red Guards down to the countryside to live as villagers, to live as peasants, which he really just wanted to get them out of the way and punish them. And so Xi Jinping was sent down as a young man to live in a village, a harsh life. I mean, they were not welcomed by the villagers. These were soft urban youth. They weren't used to slopping hogs and working in the fields and backbreaking field labor. So what Xi Jinping, you would think, because his father was persecuted and he himself was sent down and punished for only following Mao's orders, that he would be a reformer, but he's not. What he learned from that experience was that the only way to be safe in China is to be at the top of the power pyramid. And the Communist Party structure, with its central committee and with the standing committee of the Politburo, this pyramidal structure creates a system that breeds monsters like Mao Zedong. And Xi Jinping is a monster cut from the same cloth. He's not Mao's son. Mao didn't have any sons to inherit the dragon throne, or there would be a Mao on the throne today. But Xi Jinping is not the son of his loins, but he's certainly the son of Mao's spirit. And he's doing everything that Mao did in order to cement his hold on power and destroy all possible challenges to his rule.
I wanted to ask you about Xi Jinping's opinion of people like Boris Yeltsin and Mikhail Gorbachev and the fall of the Russian version, the Soviet version of communism. What has he gone on record in saying about those Soviet leaders at the end of communism there?
Well, the Chinese Communist Party was profoundly shocked by the collapse of the Soviet Union. It caught them off guard, and they immediately set up a research center to study what had caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they concluded that it was weak leadership on the part of Gorbachev, that he should have called in the troops and tanks. He should have been shooting people down in the streets the same way that China had done 2 years earlier during the Tiananmen demonstrations, when
Yes.
Deng Xiaoping, the then ruler, sent in troops and tanks to run over literally with tank treads demonstrating students and to shoot them down in the streets with machine guns, killing at least 10,000, maybe more. But Gorbachev didn't do that. And so Xi Jinping, when he took power in late 2012 and into 2013, he accumulated more and more titles, more and more power. He called a meeting of the senior officials. He said that the Soviet Union fell apart because no one had the guts to keep it together. He actually used a more colorful phrase in Chinese, but that I won't repeat on your show.
Okay. We try to keep it PG where we can.
Right.
So the Catholic Church's relationship to the church, persecuted church, the actual church in communion with Rome, that's undergone a very disturbing revolution since Francis arrived in Rome in 2013. Tell us about the much vaunted agreement between China and the Vatican and the little known facts about it. Like, has it been ratified? Has it been signed? Is it a done deal? And what are the terms?
Well, the story begins with the now disgraced former Cardinal McCarrick serving as an envoy of Pope Francis to go to China. And we know from the released letters from McCarrick to Francis that McCarrick at one point said, "I'm going to China to help fulfill the ancient dream of Matteo Ricci and hope to bring you China." So if you use McCarrick as an emissary, you know you've gotten off on the wrong foot. All right. By 2018, there were rumors that the agreement was about to be finalized. And I was in Rome in June of that year and was able to get a meeting with Cardinal Pietro Parolin, which I sought because I wanted to make sure he understood the nature of the beast that he was dealing with. Mm-hmm. And so we spent an hour. I did most of the talking about the history of the Chinese Communist Party, the things that we've talked about today, the nature of the leadership, the overweening desire of the party to be all things to all people and to stamp out religion over time, and the desire of the party to infiltrate and seize control of and ultimately crush all religion in China, especially the Catholic Church because of its foreign connections. And I got all done, and to his credit, he listened to me politely. He's a diplomat after all. He's been a diplomat since 1986. But when I got all done, he looked at me and we talked for a few minutes. He said, "Well, the agreement is ready from our point of view. We're just waiting for the Chinese Communist Party to come over and sign it." Well, they never signed it. Okay.
Never signed
all this talk about an agreement is really it should be referred to as a kind of working document, maybe discussion points, because it's not a signed document. How do I know that? Well, last year, the Chinese Communist Party openly violated these talking points, this working agreement. How did they do that? Well, they imposed Bishop Shenbin on the Catholics in Shanghai. They appointed him to be Bishop of Shanghai without consulting the Vatican. And there was silence from the Vatican for 3 months because according to what the Vatican had requested of the Chinese Communist Party, the Vatican wanted to be consulted in these appointments and wanted to have veto power if they didn't agree with an appointment. But as I say, the Communist Party never signed the agreement. We know that because when 3 months later, belatedly, Pope Francis recognized Bishop Shunbin, the Communist Party's unilateral choice for Bishop of Shanghai, as the licit Bishop of Shanghai. And Cardinal Parolin was asked, what does the agreement actually say? Why can't we see the secret document? He said, well, you can't see the agreement because we're still negotiating the terms of the agreement. We haven't reached a final conclusion. Well, in other words, there is no agreement. What has been extended twice in 2020 and 2022? I don't know. What is about to be extended again? I don't know. It's not an agreement in the common understanding of the term. It's not a compact. It's not a treaty. It's not a signed document. It's a pious hope on the part of the Vatican that the Chinese Communist Party will, in appointing bishops, please consult us first so that we can make sure that this is a good choice. And please give us veto power over your proposed appointments. Obviously, the Chinese Communist Party hasn't abided by that. I see no point in extending the agreement. What could possibly be the point of extending the agreement that has been used as a pretext by the Chinese Communist Party to force bishops and priests and laity into the schismatic Catholic Patriotic Association on the grounds that the Vatican has told them to do so in the secret document? Why doesn't the Vatican say, no, that's not what the document says? Why doesn't the Vatican say there really is no document? There's just the hope that that the Chinese Communist Party will one day, in its wisdom, come to understand that it's better to work with us than not.
One of my heroes today is Joseph Cardinal Zen of Hong Kong.
Yes.
For people who don't know him and what his struggle has been, being ignored again and again and again by Team Bergoglio, why is his voice so important for Catholics and as witnesses of Jesus Christ for China and the world?
Well, you see, Cardinal Zen, as the former Cardinal Archbishop of Hong Kong, now in his, 94 years of age, but still with us, was in charge, part of a committee on relations between the Vatican and China for many, many years. That was set up by Pope John Paul II and continued under Pope Benedict. And then once Pope Francis took the office, that committee was never convened again. In other words, Pope Francis did not want to hear from those cardinals and bishops who had the most experience, who most of them were Chinese, with dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. So he didn't formally dissolve the committee, but he just ignored it. And instead, as I say, he picked other emissaries like McCarrick to go and negotiate this supposed agreement. So Cardinal Zen was sidelined early on in this particular papacy and has been largely ignored. Now, when he learned that the Sino-Vatican agreement was supposedly going to come into force in September 2018, he too went to the Vatican and sought a meeting with Pope Francis and told him, I think, the same kinds of things that I had told Cardinal Pietro Parolin, and he was ignored. He was ignored. The Vatican started abiding by the terms of this non-agreement anyway, to the great harm of the Catholic Church in China. Cardinal Zen has been arrested in Hong Kong and charged with various crimes by the communists who now control that once free city. The great city of Hong Kong, 7.5 million people, of course, has been under the tight control of the Chinese Communist Party now for several years. Its own local elected legislature has been sidelined. And he was brought up on charges of violating the national security law. They didn't find him guilty on those counts. I think they were afraid to send such a high-profile, widely loved and respected Catholic leader to prison. But they did find him guilty of other lesser crimes. The Chinese Communist Party's motto is kill the one to warn the 100. So they pick leaders like Cardinal Zen to isolate and target in order to terrorize the rest of the population into submitting. To his credit, Cardinal Zen has not been silenced. He continues to speak out. Right now in prison is Jimmy Lai, the great lay Catholic, who used to run the only free media in Hong Kong, the Apple Daily, which for years criticized the Chinese Communist Party correctly for its crimes against the Chinese people, for its lack of freedom, and now is in prison on charges of treason. He may be in prison for the rest of his life. He said, Jimmy Lai has, that he fully expects to die in prison and that he's willing to suffer and die for his faith.
What happens if you live in China? Last question. If you say that Xi Jinping resembles Winnie the Pooh, or you make a parody caricature, what happens to you?
Well, the fact of the matter is, he does resemble Winnie the Pooh. He has a big paunch. He sort of walks like Winnie the Pooh walks, and but you can't criticize the senior leader of China. Not only will your post be censored, you'll get the midnight knock on the door. You'll be warned not to take the great leader's name or picture in vain in any way.
Mm-hmm. And the famous picture of the man carrying the two look like garbage bags facing down the tank in Tiananmen Square, that picture cannot be found. That is absolutely censored on the internet in China, I understand. Have you heard that?
Yeah, and the young man who did that courageously stood in the way of the tanks, who went on to crush with their treads unarmed protesters in the streets of Beijing. He disappeared too. He can't be found. He was arrested shortly after that. And the Chinese democracy movement, the dissidents, human rights defenders, all believe he was immediately executed.
Well, that would be a real humiliation for them, because that's a very iconic picture, like one man standing down a 45,000 pound tank. Astounding. How can people find you, Stephen Mosher? Where are you on the interwebs?
Well, I'm the president of the Population Research Institute, which makes the case that people are the ultimate resource, the one resource you can't do without, and of course that babies are blessings and not burdens, and that our long-term problem is not too many people but too few people, which it is. Even Elon Musk now agrees. 30 years too late. But we are on the internet at pop.org, pop.org, pop short for Population Research Institute. I'm on Twitter at Stephen W. Mosher, and we're on social media as Population Research Institute. So if anyone's interested in getting a copy of The Devil in Communist China, I'd be happy to send them an autographed copy. They can go on the pop.org website and order one.
Fantastic. Well, if God willing, we meet in person, I'll bring me a pen. You can sign my book. All your work is
be
great.
Happy to.
I've interviewed ambassadors to China, senior military attaches to Beijing, and you are the go-to encyclopedic Sino-American history culture man. So thanks for your time today. It's always an honor to talk to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Great show.
We are at Real Patrick Coffin on Instagram, Coffin Media on Twitter, and elsewhere on Facebook. Look us up. Keep in touch. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there? See you next time.